draw the hubbub of conversation to a natural end in that very LSE way. My name is Conor Gearty. I've worked here at LSE for a while, and I'm very delighted to have the opportunity to introduce, well, I suppose, the President and the Vice Chancellor. I don't know which is preferred. Maybe we'll learn that. For this really, it has to be said, and we haven't done much research, but I think unusual event, which is that the President and Vice Chancellor has decided, with the enthusiastic support of faculty, to deliver a lecture in this fashion. And so we all come to listen to Larry, who has, as we all know, been running a foundation, the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, for a long time. He's a stayer at his various jobs. You should know that. You should be warned. He appears to stay at places. Good man. And before that, for a very long period of time, he was Dean of Stanford Law. Stanford Law is a superb law school, and I'm delighted as a lawyer that we have Larry here, not only as whatever it is, President, Vice Chancellor, this and that, but also as a professor in the law department. And I noticed in my extensive research for this event, that he studied psychology and religious studies. Is this right, Gary? Did you make it up to impress the selectors for the job? And I think a combination of psychology and religious studies is an excellent preparation for managing this organization. Now, we have high technology. Apparently, we've just purchased a lectern. LSE appears not to have had a lectern, now has a lectern. I think it's an excellent advance. But we also have Danny. Danny is there. Danny, are you there? You call Danny. Is that your name? He is on a computer, not because he's bored and following something to do with football, some obscure league, but he is there in order to make the online presence, I think is what you now call them, feel at home. So there's a whole lot of people at home. And they are being, and I'm looking at wherever the camera is, you are being catered to by Danny. And so at a certain point after the lecture from Larry, we will take questions from the human beings in the room, if there are any. I'm assuming there will be. And we will prefer the human beings in the room initially. We certainly will, because they're in the room, no offense to the incorporeal entities elsewhere. But we will have Danny catch my eye at a certain point. So do put your questions in. There'll be some complicated way you will have been told how to do it, but you don't unmute and shout. Apparently that doesn't work. So there'll be questions and optimistically answers. I'm sure there'll be answers. And that is the opportunity to put any kind of question, just to allude to the possibility of discussion later. That will be where we can make our remarks, as it were. So we'll forbear from questioning until that moment, and then we will have the floor, and the floor will be promiscuously available to all and sundry who catch my eye. Now, the other thing to say before I hand over to Larry is that there are drinks afterwards. Drinks, plural. You're allowed to have more than one. Now, normally, I never reveal where the drinks are, but I think it's difficult to avoid them as you leave. So I will tell you where they are when you leave. On one occasion, I remember, a person who's in the room, actually, the distinguished chair, forgot to say that there were drinks afterwards. So everybody left, and there was an array of drinks with endless waiters and so on, which everybody had ignored because they hadn't been told to drink. So I shall remind you at the appropriate moment to have a drink. But before that, can you give a really strong welcome to the President and Vice Chancellor, Larry Kramer.
So before I start, I should say, I remember reading once that the Monkees, when they played, had Jimi Hendrix warm up for them. It's never a good idea to have somebody warm up for you who's going to be funnier and more charming than you are. So I apologize up front for that. I would have been perfectly happy, by the way, to be called director, but I realized I should just let that lie. And I'm actually really pleased and honored to be here. This is quite an intimidating audience, but let's get to it. So. The announcement that I was leaving the Hewlett Foundation for LSE caught my friends and colleagues in the US by surprise, and I got a ton of questions. If I was president, what was this vice chancellor thing was when I got a lot. My mom, meanwhile, could not understand why I wasn't chancellor and kept asking if I was being demoted. The question I heard most, though, was, why would you quit a job where you get to give away $600 million every year to causes and organizations you care about? Writing in Inside Philanthropy, David Callahan asked, with a gig that sweet, why would you possibly leave? And I want to begin with my answer to that question, which underlies what I want to talk about today respecting the present and future of LSE. I've said to many of you, I missed being in an environment that was primarily about ideas. Ideas play a role in professional philanthropy, but they're not themselves seen as a form of action, and the field generally shows little interest in them. When foundations do fund ideas, it's usually to create evidence for predetermined outcomes, less about learning and understanding than about justifying conclusions already reached. That never really sat well with me, that we should begin with questions, not answers, should go without saying. Advocacy should follow from research, not the reverse. The desire to advocate may frame the questions you want to ask, but it shouldn't dictate the answers. So I wanted to be back in a place where that's the norm, when the very nature of the enterprise is an ongoing conversation among participants who want, and yes, I'm going to quote our motto, to know the causes of things, and who as a result are always open to learning and changing their minds. And the stakes are high because ideas are in fact a powerful form of action, in the long run maybe the most powerful form. If you want to change how people act, there's no more effective means than changing how they think. Now, obviously, universities are not the only institutions in society where ideas are developed. They do, however, have and deserve a special place because of the singular nature of their cultures and commitments. Universities are institutionally unique inasmuch as their central task and animating reason is to develop and support a community of critical thinkers who can and will collectively analyze and seek to understand complex issues from multiple viewpoints. We are a truth-seeking enterprise that paradoxically rests on a commitment to the idea that we never know for sure if we have truth. And I say this fully cognizant, I hope, of the complexity of the word truth, with the inherent subjectivity we inescapably bring to it, framed by different positions, power, opportunities, and the like. As my friend, political philosopher Josh Cohn said to me, if you think you've got the truth, all you've shown is that you don't take the idea seriously. It is, in fact, precisely this recognition that frames our unique role in society as the only institution whose whole purpose and very reason for being is an ongoing effort both to develop ideas and to challenge ideas, including our own. And not just ideas in the abstract, ideas that address the major issues and problems of society. LSE has always appreciated this. Its explicit purpose, as articulated by the school's founders, is not just to understand causes, but to do so for the betterment of society. In a diary entry from September 1st, 1894, Beatrice Webb wrote that she and Sidney did not want to spend the Hutchinson bequest on direct political engagement because reform will not be brought about by shouting. What is needed is hard thinking. What is lacking in politics is the leaven of knowledge. Sidney has been planning to persuade the other trustees to devote the greater part of the money to encouraging research and economic study. His vision is to found, slowly and quietly, a London School of Economics and Political Science. It was a novel idea then, and still is. A school devoted explicitly and exclusively to scientific study of the problems of society and how to address them. I took that as my main challenge coming into this position. Students and scholars at LSE were central in shaping thought and action on the major issues of the 20th century. It's why the school is so well known and widely respected, why our so-called brand is so valuable. What then are the problems we can address that will maintain our relevance in the 21st century? I've spoken about this with many of you also in the months since I've arrived, and I've learned a lot from you about the kinds of things you work on and care about. I've tried to capture these in terms of 5 major challenges I see us collectively addressing. Challenges that are, in one way or another, critical for the societies in which we live, and key areas for research by LSE students and scholars going forward. These are, in short, the challenges of popular government, of political economy, of sustainability, of inequality, and of new technologies. In what follows, I won't be offering solutions to these challenges, not because I don't have ideas, but because I want here to lay out my understanding of the problems, which are already the focus of work by many across the school and so comprise at least a partial agenda for us. Note too, I will be offering my understanding of these challenges based on work I've done over the years, so my President VC hat is off for purposes of this lecture. What I'm offering is not LSE's position. LSE does not have a position, nor am I saying that this is how any of you should think about these issues, except as you may find what I have to say persuasive. But even if you think I'm entirely wrong about the particulars, the challenges stand on their own in a broader sense as key questions for LSE's scholars and students going forward, leaving room for you to take positions from the far left to the far right and to argue everything from denying that there is a challenge to arguing that I've baked in normative assumptions that misunderstand the nature of the problem or miss the really important problem altogether. So let me start with the challenge of popular government. I say popular government rather than democracy for a reason. The concept of democracy is contested and slippery. Political philosophy offers versions of democracy linked to the protection of individual rights and versions that are not. There are versions that link democracy to capitalism and versions that hold the two in opposition to each other. There are versions that are direct, versions that depend on representation through elections, and versions that rest on representatives chosen by indirect means other than elections, and on and on. In actual practice, there are almost as many forms of democratic government as there are governments claiming to be democratic, with different structures, rules for elections, forms of political parties, levels of participation, and more. And of course, none of these systems meets its stated aims, in that all reflect popular will imperfectly at best. All invariably exclude certain groups as a practical matter and sometimes formally, and all tolerate degrees of inequality of political power that cannot be squared with the theory. So I think it's more useful to start with a looser construct of popular government, by which I mean a government that satisfies two minimal conditions. First, as a normative matter, the government is established on principles, say in a written or customary constitution, that formally commit it to govern by the will of the people and as best it can to reflect their collective decisions about what to do and not do. Second, as a descriptive matter, the government does this well enough that people can realistically seek to improve the system in whatever ways it falls short of this normative commitment through processes set up in the system itself. That is, change remains credibly possible without having to resort to extra-legal or illegal actions. And if that seems like a low bar, let's not forget how incredibly difficult it was even to get there, and how fragile and short-lived every effort to establish such governments proved to be from the time of the ancient Greeks to the late 18th century. Even then, it was not until after the two world wars that governments meeting my minimal definition of popular ceased to be exceptional. Now, using that as a starting point leaves room for the kind of work that constitutes most of the research about democracy, but it does so in a way that steers clear of often fruitless definitional arguments in favor of a pragmatic approach focused on what practices can bring our always flawed democracies closer to what they should be. A great many LSE students and scholars are engaged in this important work, and democracies around the globe can and are benefiting from their efforts to help make governments more inclusive and to improve their capacity to meet the desires and preferences of their peoples. Quick caveat, I went back and forth about whether to call out the work of specific LSE scholars. Because so many of you are doing important scholarship on these and related problems, I made the choice to skip names for fear that, like a bad Oscar acceptance speech, I would inevitably leave people out. So no names. In any event, democracy faces an even bigger challenge today, namely the risk that we could lose even this minimal form of popular government. Such a claim would likely have been ridiculed as recently as, say, 2016, and was ridiculed when I first made it in 2012. But it would be naive to dismiss it today. Abundant evidence shows rapidly declining faith in democracy and a pronounced drop in support for the idea that even having such a government matters, especially among younger people. Moreover, by almost every empirical measure we have, democracy is in retreat globally. The reason for this is not, I think, the kinds of shortfalls that are the focus of traditional scholarship in the field. Those concerns matter, as I just noted, and they call for research and reform, but efforts to improve along these lines are insufficient and paradoxically can make popular government less robust and stable. The reason is that there is also a precondition for popular government in any form to exist and persist. Namely, that the people within a state or nation share a sense that they are part of the same political community, notwithstanding their differences and disagreements. If instead they see disagreements within their own communities as coming from enemies and antagonists, if they see outcomes they oppose as an effort to take their country, deny their identity, or destroy their way of life, there is no possibility for any kind of shared government. Point is as old as the Bible. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all quote Jesus saying that every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation, and the house divided against itself falleth, language Abraham Lincoln quoted prophetically in 1858, 2 years before the American Civil War. We have long taken this sense of shared political identity for granted, yet we now see it collapsing everywhere. Political scientists talk about polarization, and we've seen divisions within our nations deepen over the past decade or two, from ideological polarization, that is, disagreement over ideas, to affective polarization, that is, hatred and animosity toward political and ideological opponents, to outgroup loathing accompanied by hopelessness. As this happens, societies around the globe, though most pronouncedly in the developed world, are becoming divided houses that cannot stand. As for causes, there are many. One of the things you learn doing historical research is that in retrospect, major developments always seem to be overdetermined. So take your pick. Demographic changes, including immigration, social changes empowering or seeming to empower formerly subordinated groups, most especially women, media fragmentation, social media, wealth inequality, lack of civics education, physical sorting of where people live, the erosion of social capital, et cetera, et cetera. All these and more have been identified by scholars as causes of the current crisis of democracy. The critical question is, what will it take to rebuild a sense of shared political community in fragmented and fragmenting societies? And the second question, how can we do that while building wider acceptance for desirable changes in progress, such as increased diversity and giving voice to those who have lacked it, that have been exploited by opportunistic politicians on both ends to make the problem worse? Because one of the hard truths about politics today is that efforts to improve the process have themselves been sucked into the polarization maw and become yet one more factor contributing to deepening our divides. So here's a challenge for our times, one many people across this university are already working on and in a position to help answer. With that in mind, consider the next problem, political economy. This one has been at the heart of LSE since its beginning. As the term political economy also has many meanings, I'm using it in its original sense, the sense of Adam Smith, David Hume, and Francois Quesnay, for whom it was a branch of moral philosophy, a values-based inquiry about the proper relationship between markets, government, and society. It hardly seems controversial to note that what has for the past 50 years been the dominant approach to political economy, what people now call neoliberalism, is failing. I say that knowing that neoliberalism was not embraced in many parts of the world. Even in those places, however, it was effectively imposed, if only because of the ways in which the United States and Europe used their political and economic muscle, including skewing international financial institutions like the World Bank, IMF, and WTO to adopt neoliberal approaches. To say that neoliberalism is failing, by the way, also does not require denying things it helped accomplish. With some pain, it energized stultified economic growth in the 1980s while bringing high inflation, high interest rates, and high unemployment under control. The free trade regime it fostered has played an important role in bringing hundreds of millions of people out of extreme poverty, and its focus on free markets helped catalyze innovations that have improved lives in many ways and given us all cheaper and better commodities like cars, phones, TVs, and computers. It has, unfortunately, floundered when it comes to what many, I dare say most, would regard as the most important necessaries of life, including better education, better healthcare, and better housing. Over time, it has also produced skyrocketing wealth inequality, which turns out to be a feature rather than a bug of neoliberal economics, along with wage stagnation, not to mention the adverse consequences of its free trade approach in the developed world. And perhaps most importantly, it has proved inadequate to deal with emergent developments like climate change, changes in gender and race relations, and a workplace transformed by the very technologies it catalyzed. As in the case of popular government, there is a great deal of important and impressive work being done on these problems at LSE. I didn't know until I got here just how much is happening across the school, especially on healthcare and health policy, education and education policy, not to mention issues of gender, race, sexual identity, and the like. People in departments throughout the university are both doing research to better understand and pioneering new policy approaches to a whole range of economic and social problems. This is important work, and we can and should all be proud of it, and the school can and should make efforts to help amplify it. Yet here, too, I want to suggest this work addresses only part of today's challenge. When it comes to political economy, the reason has to do with the intersection of ideas and politics. Because the likelihood that a particular policy will be enacted and will stick is not solely, perhaps not even primarily, a product of the policy's quality and sense. Rather, in actual governance, particular policies are always and necessarily nested in a broader set of ideas about political economy, an intellectual paradigm, if you will, that affect the likelihood of adoption and success. A political economy paradigm in this sense is always contingent. There's no timeless perfect wisdom, but simply an approach that in a particular context and for a particular time achieves acceptance because it works as an explanation for people, meaning it provides a convincing account of what people see in the world around them, which in turn structures how they think about and understand the economy, what its ends should be, and so what government should and should not do. So let me say a little bit more about the nature of these paradigms to frame what I understand to be the further problem we need to address today. So first, except during intermittent periods of transition, there always is a prevailing paradigm, not held unanimously, nothing ever is held unanimously, but held widely enough to make possible what we think of as normal politics. Conflict doesn't disappear, but clashes are worked out within broadly shared premises that enable the kinds of compromises that are necessary in a complex society in which people have divergent preferences. Now, again, that's in addition to the shared sense of political community I spoke about in connection with popular government. There needs also to be sufficient overlap in ideas to make accommodation across differences possible. Put in economic terms, if you analogize ideas to things with a price, ideal prices will definitely differ, but there must be an overlap in reservation prices, is sort of the way I think about it. Second, intellectual paradigms influence the outcomes of politics by tilting the playing field for or against competing claims. They do not of their own force determine particular political outcomes. Those are ultimately dictated by interests, cultural beliefs, material needs, and other contingencies, not least the talent and tactical decisions of the various actors. What the paradigm does is structure the rules of engagement and shape how political and lay actors understand their interests, beliefs, and material needs, putting a thumb on the scale in favor of some arguments and against others, while concealing or even obscuring options that fall too outside their main premises. Third, intellectual paradigms are understood differently by and function differently for different actors. Ordinary citizens and political leaders comprehend the paradigm at a relatively high level of generality. For them, it's a thumbnail sketch, just thick enough to make sense of the world without being or needing to be a comprehensive political or economic philosophy. The same is not true for policymakers or academics, for whom the paradigm offers just such an overarching philosophy, which they then rely on to propose and justify practical solutions to policy and political problems. The key is the way in which these different understandings are linked. A paradigm works when the solutions it shapes for policymakers and academics are intellectually consistent with the thumbnail sketch of ordinary citizens while addressing these citizens' problems well enough in practice to prop up and sustain that understanding. The intellectual paradigm that prevails at any given time then does so not because it fits or explains the world perfectly. No paradigm ever does that. It prevails because enough citizens, political leaders, and policymakers perceive it to fit the world better than the available alternatives. It follows that as circumstances change and evolve, a paradigm that has been accepted may lose its explanatory power. Changes in technology, politics, and society will transform the economic and social environment in ways that an established paradigm deals with poorly or not at all. Because accepted paradigms tend to be sticky once they're embraced, though, the dissonance between what the paradigm teaches about how things should work on the one hand and the world as people are experiencing it on the other must grow quite large before enough people come to feel disaffected to produce change on a widespread scale. As this happens, we see increasing political and social turmoil until another explanation achieves achieves acceptance, normal politics resumes, and the cycle then repeats. The process is actually familiar. Think of the evolution of ideas and the politics they created in the shifts from mercantilism to laissez-faire in the early to mid-19th century, to Keynesian social democracy in the 1930s, and finally to neoliberalism in the 1960s and 70s. As each paradigm collapsed, we experienced heightened political disruption with competition among rival paradigms, socialism, communism, fascism, etc., until a new conventional wisdom achieved sufficiently widespread acceptance that what we think of as normal politics resumed. The shifts can be dramatic, as was the case with communism and fascism, but that need not be so, and wholesale replacement with something radically different is actually pretty rare. More typically, as in the change from laissez-faire to Keynes, or Keynes to neoliberalism, new paradigms reorder familiar concepts and tools to fit new and changed circumstances. Still, the consequences for governance of even modest reordering can be profound. It doesn't take, I think, great insight to see that we are today in the midst of another period of political disruption akin to the 1920s and 30s or the 1960s and 70s. Much as people lost faith in laissez-faire or in Keynesian public management, they've lost faith in the market fundamentalism of neoliberalism. As in these earlier periods, this shows up as a loss of faith in the political institutions that have embodied the intellectual paradigm, accompanied by social turmoil and chaotic politics. And as in these earlier episodes, people are looking for alternatives, other explanatory frameworks to help them make sense of the despairing confusion they feel and to guide their choices of political leadership and direction. Right now, unfortunately, the available choices are pretty thin. China offers one option, state-run capitalism without individual rights. The other option, which seems to be taking root in much of the world, is being called populism, but is really just forms of ethno-nationalism. We see this tendency underlying the support for Trump and for leaders in so many other countries whose chief appeal is to blame some other while calling for return to a make-believe version of a true national culture, which is where LSE comes in. The challenge is to offer something better, to develop ideas and policies and frameworks that provide a more attractive alternative not just to the failing neoliberal regime, but to the appeal of illiberal democracy, a vision for a more inclusive democratic politics that can produce a more justly distributed wealth and well-being. That entails much more than economics. To successfully enact a new policy program, we need a new values-based ethical framework connected to a new economic approach in which any such program can be nested. Note in this connection that both Keynes's general theory and Hayek's road to serfdom, the texts for their respective visions of political economy, were as much about ethics and civil morality, more even, than they were about economics. So we need a better account of society than the methodological individualism of neoliberalism, and we need to link that account to values more serviceable and compelling than the constrained notion of negative liberty that animates it. Likewise, we need a more normatively attractive measure for success in governance than neoliberalism's focus on economic growth as measured by GDP, one that includes not only greater concern for the distribution of wealth, but also for aspects of well-being beyond the economic. Most important, we need synthetic work that integrates these elements into the kind of persuasive, holistic account that becomes conventional wisdom for ordinary citizens. Work on every element of this is underway at LSE, but if you've ever seen a clip of Milton Friedman explaining on the Johnny Carson show how a pencil is made, compellingly making the case for neoliberalism to a mass audience, you know we still have a ways to go. LSE can, and I hope will be, one of the places to catalyze the next political economy paradigm as it was the last two. With respect to sustainability, if we've learned anything in recent years, it's that there are limits to how much nature can give to our efforts to create material wealth for ourselves. These limits have been reached or are nearing across a number of ecological systems, not just greenhouse gas emissions, but also biodiversity, fresh water, aerosol loading, that is particulate air pollution, and others. So today I'm going to focus on greenhouse gases and climate. I began to work on climate when I joined the Hewlett Foundation in 2012. While climate models necessarily offer a wide range of possible results, the most likely ones at the time forecast that business as usual would increase global average temperatures by 4 to 5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels by the end of the century. That might not make humans extinct, but it would definitely be more than our political and economic systems can bear. So think Mad Max. That's not a joke. Except that one's all about gasoline, but apart from that. A dozen years later, between what has been done and what is already in process, the same models put us reasonably on track for an increase of 2.7 to 3.6 degrees Celsius. And if current pledges to cut emissions are met, we can keep the temperature rise as low as 1.8 degrees. Now, those numbers are still dire. Even 1.8 degrees, probably the best we can hope for at this point, will be bad. But considering that in 2012, the entire global economy was running on fossil fuels, it should nevertheless be seen as remarkable progress, a combined product of new technologies and successful efforts to raise the ambitions of both public and private actors. So what next is the question. We have many of the technologies we need, and where these are lacking, they are in development. With the right kind of support and encouragement, we have good reason to believe they will be available in time. And while greater ambition is still needed, the most effective way to raise it is to successfully deploy the technologies we have and successfully carry out the pledges already made. For now, in other words, the fight for sustainability needs to focus on implementation. Make no mistake, the challenges to implement existing pledges and technologies are formidable. They are also challenges of social science, of economics and finance and political science, of law and sociology and psychology, and, well, pretty much every discipline at LSE. More specifically, I would frame the immediate challenge around 3 efforts we need successfully to execute in the coming decade or two, all of equal necessity. First is the effort physically to transform our energy systems, that is, to deploy new energy technologies, phasing out fossil fuels, though at a pace and in ways that do not devastate the hundreds of millions of people whose lives still depend on them, building solar farms and wind farms and other sources of renewable energy, building the infrastructure for electrification of our transportation and built environment, not to mention the production and use of low-carbon steel, cement, and industrial chemicals, developing sources and supply chains for the critical minerals needed, again, in ways that do not further degrade ecosystems and biodiversity, and so on. Doing this includes, among other things, figuring out the economics, creating facilitative legal frameworks, working out supply chains and labor supply, et cetera, all things I think people at LSE are thinking about when they're showering in the morning. Second is the effort required to finance the first effort. By what are probably conservative estimates, to accomplish the needed transformation in time, we must invest something like $1 to $1.5 trillion every year for the next 25 years. It's a number we're not yet close to reaching, one that will require shaking loose both public and private resources. We need creative thinking from people working in finance and economics and political science and law, coupled with work in social and behavioral disciplines to make sure the new policies and approaches gain traction and stick. Third is the effort needed to make a just transition, that is, to execute the first 2 efforts in ways that are fair to those who have borne or will, if we are not careful, unfairly bear disproportionate costs. That includes finding ways to compensate the peoples of the world who will suffer loss and damage from warming already locked in, and ensuring that the costs of the transition are not disproportionately imposed on those who have always had to bear them in the past. It also includes finding solutions for the people and communities whose lives have been built by and around the fossil fuel industrial complex, from workers in coal mines and oil fields and refineries to those who build pipelines and drive trucks and work in gas stations, to whole regions whose financial health and local cultures have been built on fossil fuel production. There is more, actually. I've not touched on concerns for ecosystem conservation and preserving biodiversity, much less the overwhelming needs for adapting to the climate change that is happening and will happen even if we hit our mitigation target. But there's already work on all these issues happening across the school, and the new Global School of Sustainability is designed to provide a hub to support it so as to amplify what we can do. Thinking about a just energy transition leads naturally to the challenge of addressing invidious inequalities more broadly. Of course, that's a topic that has been at the forefront of academic, social, and political discourse for a very long time, especially at LSE, where it has been core to the work of students and scholars from the very beginning. The only point I want to make here has to do with framing. Inequality is often talked about as if it were a single indivisible problem, which of course it is not. It is many problems, each requiring its own diagnosis and cure. Inequality is in this sense like cancer, not one disease, but many, related in a broad sense, but each needing its own specific treatment. It is indeed, and in my view, more productive to think of inequality as an essential aspect of other problems. As we rebuild our political communities, how do we ensure that those whose voices have been unheard or disregarded achieve equal status? As we develop new ways of thinking about political economy, how do we do so in ways that also address systemic exclusions that have further disadvantaged certain groups, and so on? I emphasize the point only because framing the issue explicitly this way turns out to matter when it comes to making progress, actual progress in the world. And here I'm drawing on my experience in philanthropy, where the tendency to treat inequality as a standalone concern invariably hampered efforts to address it by making it seem as if there were a zero-sum choice between dealing with substantive dimensions of a problem and dealing with inequalities. For example, the debate over wealth disparities became a choice between reducing wealth inequality generally or reducing the racial wealth gap, as if seeing them as part of the same problem and proposing solutions for both simultaneously was improper or impracticable. In any event, the challenge of reducing inequality remains in the 20th century, though with the addition of some new forms and contexts, such as access to broadband and AI, or the effects of social media, that require new analyses and diagnoses to understand. Which brings me to the challenge of new technologies. This is a huge topic because there are so many new technologies disrupting so many traditions and practices across so many domains: economic, social, political, and cultural. As with sustainability, I will here focus on one as an illustration of the larger challenge: artificial intelligence. I choose it because it looks likely to be both the most fertile and the most disruptive technology of the technology revolution. Generative AI is also so new and is evolving and improving so quickly that no one can really say they understand it yet. There are, however, a few things I think we can say with reasonable confidence, and these frame the challenge I see for students and scholars in the social sciences. First, the AI revolution is going to upend practices across society, but especially in knowledge industries, which means in universities. It will change not just our administrative operations, but how and what we teach and how and what we research, though in ways that will reveal themselves over time. Second, like all new technologies, whether the social and economic changes AI produces are for good or ill is not inherent in the technology. New technologies may be good or bad or both, and to different degrees and in different ways. It's a matter of how we decide to use and deploy them, which means it's a matter on which social scientists, once again, should have a great deal to offer. Take the internet as an example. It has had profoundly beneficial consequences, making knowledgeable accessible to vastly larger numbers of people, for instance, and profoundly damaging ones, such as the ease of spreading disinformation. All of those result from choices made and not made when it was still new. If we could go back, we would construct internet policy very differently, but the path having been created, we now live with the consequences. Which leads to a third point. We cannot avoid making choices now. Leaving AI to develop however markets shape it is a choice. Regulating it is a choice. Not choosing is a choice. Whatever we do or don't do now will shape how AI wends its way into our lives. So we need to make these choices as best we can, but in ways that preserve flexibility to change course if our initial choices turn out badly. That kind of regulatory design problem is a classic social science challenge. In terms of our internal operations, the emergence of AI poses some clear, if difficult, challenges, such as how best to incorporate it into the school's administrative processes, and how to ensure that students and staff have both access to and training for what they need. This is going to become one of the foundational skills that everybody in the university is going to have facility with. Figuring out the implications of AI for teaching is going to be tricky. An initial effort to restrict or ban its use was abandoned pretty quickly once people realized that would just encourage cheating. Since then, schools everywhere have been trying to figure out how best to regulate its use. Speaking for myself, I think we should go farther. We should affirmatively want students to use AI and then ask ourselves how our classes and our teaching need to change. Put another way, rather than asking how to conform the use of AI to current models of what and how we are teaching, we need to rethink what we have to offer students through our teaching, given what this technology can do, and given how it will transform the jobs students move into after they leave here. There is already a huge hunger among employers for graduates who, as part of their education, know how to integrate AI into their work, which is itself already beginning to transform how that work is done. We need to prepare students accordingly. That's a challenge. The most exciting aspect of the AI revolution is on the research side, where the challenge is how to take advantage of the incredible range of opportunities AI offers or will soon offer. The current focus of most AI research is on the potential threats and problems and how to avoid them, whether algorithmic bias in the data, deep fakes, or your fear of the Terminator. These are important questions, but the possibilities for beneficial uses are of at least equal importance. We have, in fact, hardly begun to explore what AI can do for social science research. For example, taking full advantage of its ability to find patterns in massive data sets and tease out possible causation in ways that we cannot presently discern or even hypothesize. These and other possibilities will continue to unfold as AIs become better and more powerful, and innovative researchers think of new ways to use them. As part of that, there is a need for research on how to design AIs for social science. helping those who build and train them to do so with social science rather than natural science models and constructs. Then, of course, there's research maximizing the use of AI for social benefit. For myself, I'm most interested in the question of labor displacement. Historically, new technologies displaced forms of then existing labor while creating new forms. A result today's techno-optimists say should be the case with this new technology as well. And they could be right, but I'm not so sure. Unlike earlier technological breakthroughs, AIs will presumably be capable of learning to do any new jobs they create. And insofar as a machine will invariably be able to do these jobs faster and cheaper than humans, the risk of labor displacement is very real. Certainly, the risk seems high if we just leave the development of AI to our current market-based approach, which incentivizes a short-term focus on increasing productivity and decreasing costs. So we need new research to determine how we can implement and integrate rapidly developing forms of artificial intelligence in ways that enhance human capacities. That is, in ways that maximize the benefits of human-AI partnership. We then need to figure out how to create incentives to use these rather than focusing on what is cheap or fast. In any event, these are just a few of the countless challenges and opportunities being created by generative AI, which makes this critical terra nova for social science research of all kinds. Okay, just a few more words to draw this all together. Sorry. As I noted at the beginning, the 5 challenges I've described encompass a broad range of pressing issues with respect to which there is need for an equally broad range of social science research. Hence the title for this talk, drawn from the entry I quoted in Beatrice Webb's diary about the reason for founding LSE. What is needed is hard thinking. I presented these challenges as if they are distinct when they are, of course, deeply interconnected. Challenge of popular government is driven by failures of political economy and inequalities and vice versa, as well as other social changes. Pressure across all this is added by the escalating consequences of climate change and so on. There are, moreover, different ways you might slice these problems. One colleague has argued that I'm missing geopolitics, another that they don't see some critical actors in my account, from subnational entities like cities to supranational ones like the UN. Still another chided me for ignoring critical issues like the consequences of a predicted decline in global population. For what it's worth, I see all these topics as comprised in the challenges I've described, though time makes it impossible to spell everything out, and I've already made this much too long. The criticism, someone laughed. The criticisms do, however, highlight something else I noted at the outset. These are my perspectives on the challenges of the day, which are hardly conclusive and may not even be right. My job and my hope over the coming years is to provide all of you the support, resources, and space to do your best work on these and whatever other challenges emerge. The great strength of a university is its decentralization. I don't mean administratively, I mean intellectually. Many or most of the best ideas and advances of the past several centuries have come from people in universities, more than a few from this one. That has happened, I believe, because of the environment a great university fosters and protects, one in which a community of scholars working in different disciplines, asking different questions, using different methodologies, reaching different conclusions, all have the freedom to explore widely and deeply, and most importantly, without fear. A community in which differences are not just tolerated but sought, and on an assumption of good faith. And a community in which we remain constantly alive to the paradox I noted at the outset, that we pursue truth while never assuming that we have it. It's from and through that ferment that we can come to a deeper understanding of the causes of things and will continue to contribute to the betterment of society. Thank you.
Well done. You can take the answers from there, I suppose. Yeah, I'll stay up there. Oh, well, the round of applause says it all, doesn't it? Really, really terrific stuff from the erstwhile director, now president and vice chancellor. So, we've got lots of time because of the discipline of Larry, and I think hats off. We have about 40 minutes or so, so we have time to develop some themes here. And we have Danny standing by. Danny, remind them they can ask questions. I don't want to make you the whole center of the thing, Danny, but you're quite an important guy. And remind them they can ask questions. And I don't need to remind all of you that you can, from now on, seek to catch my eye. And we might take 2 or so or 3, and see where we are. And we have a microphone just there, and we have presumably some sort of microphone up there, and we need a sort of raised hand or 2 in order to commence. When we begin this, and it'll take a little while, and I'm very happy to wait, we need, if we can at all, tell people who we are. I think that's helpful, unless you very much prefer not to. And also taking a cue from Larry, be reasonably succinct, and also as a kind of bonus, there should be a question. So I'm laying on a sort of one-man show here because I'm waiting for a hand. I mean, I'm perfectly happy to go on like this for 40 minutes, but you may want to. We have a hand. We have 2 hands from suspiciously the same row. These must be people put in place by LSE. So we're going to take the 2 hands that have gone up, if possible, setting a good tone, name and shortish question. And then, sir, we're going to go to you. And then I'm looking around. We've got a 3rd man. I'm in the market for some gender balance. But, sir, away you go.
Hi, my name is Mikey. I'm a student in the Masters of Political Science and Conflict Studies, and I think that's going to frame my question. You said that geopolitics is something that you left out, but you think that it fits into all 5 of the challenges for the social sciences, and I was hoping you would just elaborate a little bit more on how you think geopolitics fits into these challenges and what we can do as students and scholars to make the world a little bit less of a tense place than it is at the moment.
Mikey, terrific. And you can pass the mic just a bit to your left there.
Do we wait for an answer, or do I ask right now?
I think we want to take 2 questions at a time.
We're going to take 2, but I mean, let's hear who you are, and then maybe we'll decide whether to answer it. We might go on. We might take about 17 in a row and we forget yours, so be careful. Away you go. Name and question, please.
Hi, Dr. Kramer. My name is Aryan. Thank you so much for doing this. I was referring to something that you mentioned while talking about popular government, when you said that people in a country should feel that they belong to the same political community. Do you think that we are in a place right now where we are confused about what a country is? Is it just land within a border? Is it a jurisdiction of a government? Or does it necessarily have to have a shared system of values? And do you think deferring or conflicting opinions on that very question is to do with the vociferous, divisive nature of politics between the left and the right today?
Great. Thank you very much. I have a hand up here, but I'm going to go to you, I think, Larry, for first 2.
So I didn't think I left out geopolitics. Somebody else suggested that I did, or at least suggested that that was a better vertical or horizontal, whichever, by which to describe the challenges. So as I said, I think none of them are either national or international alone. They all involve both. So if you're going to think about how to address climate change, you can't just think in national terms, nor can you just think in international terms. You need to be thinking about both and the way in which geopolitical considerations both construct and limit what your opportunity set is. And I think of that as true across all 5. So although you could have started with geopolitics and then said, and those comprise questions of climate and political. So that's the part in which it can be done either way. But there's no question that the challenges themselves all raise issues that involve, as I say, both national, multinational, international politics and institutions, and you have to think about them that way. In terms about the second question, I mean, so historically, what we think of in terms of modern popular government or democracy is absolutely connected to the emergence of the modern nation state. And for the vast majority of people in the world, that is how they are thinking about it and describing it. So there are obviously lots of academic critiques and political critiques about whether that's the best way to think about things. So I said I'm open to all sorts of possible ideas. But for now, at least, that's how citizens are thinking about their political communities. And within those are beginning to say, those people want to destroy our country, my country, whatever it is. So again, if you think about ways to tackle it, you could think about ways that begin with dissolving the modern nation state. There's certainly a literature to that effect. I actually don't think that you're going to get very far yet in this world. I don't think people are ready for that. So it's a question of, given that that's how people are framing their communities, what can we do to make them be willing to accept the others within the community? The more interesting debate, by the way, within those communities does come up in the context of immigration, right? Who gets to count as a citizen? And those debates, again, have been around since the 19th century and are one of the active sites in which we will continue to fight this out and should. But again, it's you want it in a framework where people who disagree, there's going to be a process, it's going to lead to a conclusion. Are you prepared to live with that conclusion while you try and change it from within the process? If not, you have a problem in sustaining that as your process for resolving anything. That's really the point.
Thank you, Larry. We're going to go over here. We've got two. We've got this gentleman, and behind you, the lady. And we're going to prioritize the lady. The microphone is heading to you at fairly prompt speed. And we're going to take these two, Larry, okay? And then we'll come back to you. And then we have certainly got one or two others. But let's say, and then, Danny, we've not forgotten them. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Jo. I was here in the 1990s, and in LSE's... Hello, Larry. Good to see you.
This is all getting a little bit intimate.
In LSE's history, there's been a wide range of different economic kind of viewpoints. It used to have a reputation for being very radical. Certainly in the 90s, the Hayek Society was one of the most popular. So it's perhaps been through the different iterations. I was really struck by what you said about hoping LSE will be one of the places to catalyse the next economic paradigm. And I was interested if you could tell us a bit more about the reaction from people in the economics department to that proposal.
Right, I think there'll be less intimacy in the future there. I mean, excellent. Sir, you've got the microphone. Name and question if you...
I'm Delbert Sandiford, and I was here perhaps 20 years earlier than Joe, 1970s. A lot of what you said was around gainers and losers. You talked, for example, about people in the fossil fuel industry who will lose out. Gainers and losers. This place has a reputation for talking a lot about redistribution as a way of handling that. On the other extreme, you have the Chicago School with people like Frank Knight, James Buchanan, and so on, who talked about compensating the losers, finding a way of bribing them, if you like. Could you tell me anything about work that's going on here at the moment about compensating the losers?
Thank you very much. Did you say your name was what was the name again?
Delbert Sandiford.
Thank you very much, Delbert. Larry, over to you, those two, please.
Okay. Actually, on the second question, I don't know. I have to confess I'm sufficiently new here that I don't know the answer to that question at that level of specificity. But anybody who's out here who's working on it should feel free to chime in, at least on that specific way of framing and thinking about the issue. I mean, redistribution is the classic. It was both Keynesian, but more the neoliberal solution, right? Let's let markets rip, generate as much growth as we can, and to the extent that that creates a problem, take some of it and redistribute down. I don't think that has worked terribly well for all sorts of both political and economic reasons, but as I say, this is the transition to Joe's question. Part of it is, what does the next way of thinking about this look like? So what I would say is, the economics department as such, I don't think has a position. The people in it have many of them have different positions, but, I'm going back, as you know, as a funder, we helped arrange the funding for the Cohesive Capitalism Initiative, which is one of the places here that is focused on these questions. Again, for me, it's who's working on the broader set of issues, because I wouldn't say I have the answer. I mean, I have thoughts, but to make one of these paradigms work, it's both. You have to come up with the ideas, and they have to be persuasive. So it's what's going to stick out there in the world. Switching as a funder, we funded we created 18 of these centers globally. We funded a huge array because just to see what were the kinds of ideas that would develop and what would take. And would it be better than the alternatives that are on offer? So, this is an area in which the perfect is absolutely the enemy of the good. And what you're trying to create is the kind of intellectual ferment and ideas exchange through which you hope both good ideas develop that can take politically, which is kind of my answer to the other question as well. Those are two ways. My guess is there are others. As I say, I've always been, so one piece, there's the work it's from political science, Jacob Hacker and Paul Pearson on pre-distribution, where we can structure our markets at the front end to produce that better distribution, so we don't need to either focus on compensation or redistribution to anywhere near the same extent, because, now the transition from fossil fuels raises a different problem, right? Because actually what we are talking about doing is through various, whether it's regulation or market moves, taking a whole industry offline and all of the people who are connected it's not going to be enough just to say, well, start over from scratch, and we've tried to structure our economy so that you'll get a fair share. We do need to think about those transitions as such. Depends on what you mean by compensation. Redistribution is not going to be a solution for those people. It's what are you going to do for our lives? What are you going to do? And it's not just economic. I mean, again, if you've traveled in any of these communities, the cultures of the place are built around this as well. You should all read, if you haven't read Arlie Hochschild, both of her books. She just published a new one, and they give you a strong sense of the way in which, communities and lives and cultures have been built around this. The first book is better because it's in an oil, fossil fuel area. We have to think about how to deal with that. And as I say, that's what all of you guys are for.
Right. We've got a lady, I'm just giving you forewarnings, a lady up there and there's a lady here, and then we've got Paul beside me. But first of all, Danny, has anybody, stop looking around, Danny, it's you. Has anybody spoken from the ether? And could you give us maybe two? You've selected them from the hundreds that have poured in.
I really was not prepared for my level of importance in this event.
This is the biggest day in his life.
It is justified. So, fitting the non-corporeal theme, we have an anonymous user who asks, you mentioned the all-important notion of ideation and the importance of technology early in your talk. What role do you think a social sciences university holds in the world of entrepreneurship? And Gavin Charles asks, you referred briefly to the many surveys and studies showing growing openness to authoritarianism among youth. As an institution specifically aimed at molding the minds of future leaders, what role and mandate does LSE have in reinforcing democracy, or popular government, if you prefer, across generations?
Great, thanks, Danny, very much. Have you got those, Larry?
Yeah.
Yeah, Anon and Gavin.
Okay, on the first point, there's two different, which is what role does the social science institution have in entrepreneurship, sort of two answers. It depends on what one means by entrepreneurship. It is one of those words that's used very differently. So I'm going to assume that what the person means by it is the developing of new businesses and new business models. So as you see at LSE, actually one of our sort of most significant institutions has been Generate, which I think has been recognized a couple of times as the top place for social innovation in Europe. I don't know if we've yet gotten there globally. And that's simply because the idea, look, you have different ways to make changes in the world, right? So you can do it through government, you can do it through private industry, private sector, you can do it through the civil society sector. All three of those are available, and in all three there's room for innovation and new ideas. And there's no reason that people with the social science education can't contribute to all three of them, and do and should. So we try and support all three of them. The other point, though, that I would make is entrepreneurship doesn't take place in a vacuum. So whether it's the development of new business models or the success or not of existing ones, it's all grounded in regulatory frameworks, in government regulation, in culture, in relationships among people, all of the things that social scientists think about and worry about. So even if you want to think about how best to foster entrepreneurship, apart from the possibility that people here may want to do it, is also thinking about how to create the environment for it and the right kind of entrepreneurship to take place. On the second question, it comes back to that thing, which is, this is where I'm taking off my own head. I obviously believe in democracy. I think it's a good thing. It's like everything else we do here. The university as such actually does not have a position and can't and shouldn't need to. And it's the positions are the ones that our faculty and our staff hold and share and fight and argue about. And in that sense, we are part of the larger debates that are taking place in the society, but hopefully from a different angle and creating different opportunities and incentives for people to explore. So it's not our job to evangelize or proselytize that people should think a particular way. I don't worry about it so much in the sense that when I look at the faculty and the staffs of universities and the kinds of people who historically have and continue to go into higher education, the debate is there and the issues are there, and I think we remain one of the best places to think about and push for what works. Now, here's a different thought I'm going to offer. This is the scary one for me, not just about democracy, but about popular government. I actually wrote this a few years ago. If you had gone to 13th century France and tried to make it a democracy, it would have failed. You just could not have done it. However good you think the idea of democracy is, the social, political, cultural, and economic conditions of the time would not have made it possible. Democracy emerges as all of those conditions change, over time. I mean, I think, to me, what's interesting about Hobbes as a political philosopher is he's writing as the feudal system is collapsing, and seeing sort of, right, the feudal system was the system which everybody was assigned a particular, like you couldn't have had democracy in that system. People were assigned roles within a social, so they were kept pretty rigidly within them. It worked for the people of that time and what they were willing to accept. As conditions change, he writes about masterless men, right? People are suddenly wandering around. All of that is breaking down. So he can see the collapse of it, and all he can see for the solution is Leviathan. We're going to just need some kind of tyrant. And in fact, liberal democracy is what emerges out of that, and it works. But no more or less than any of these other systems is it grounded in the social, political, cultural, and economic conditions of the time. And there's no reason, I hate to say it, to think that democracy is any more permanent than feudalism was or imperialism or any of these other systems. So the question we need to be thinking about, a bigger and deeper question, is whether the social, political, economic, and cultural conditions of our world today are such that the forms of liberal democracy that we have lived with are not working. And we need to think about something else. That is, to some extent, both the democracy, popular government, and the political economy challenge, because hopefully the something else we can come up with is better than either the retreat to ethno-nationalism or some kind of flat-out tyranny. But how to make those kinds of systems work in a world where the problems are global, not confined to nationalities, where we don't seem to have developed very good institutions for global governance in any sort of shared way. Those are huge challenges. So as I say, it's not surprising that people might sort of begin to lose faith in this idea that no longer seems to be working. I mean, I have a 24-year-old daughter. She's terrified of what her future looks like. I kind of understand that in a way that I never was when I was her age, right? And so, institutions that I would take for granted, even as problematic as they were, growing up in Watergate, US, she can't and doesn't. And that's a huge challenge that, as I say, I think we need to think hard about and address.
Thanks, Larry. Yeah. We've got a lady up here who caught my eye earlier and is now getting the microphone. We've got a lady down here. Sorry to describe it in gender terms. Yeah, hand is now up. Can we get a microphone down here? And then we've got my friend Paul. So we'll say who we all are, but we're starting with you, Matt.
Thank you very much. My name is Nelly Kirillova, PhD, and now I'm a visiting fellow at the LSE Ideas. I focus on geopolitics, international security, conflict prevention, and my question will be related to this. So, Professor Kramer, you mentioned that the universities create the new ways of thinking of different societies. This means also across the world from different countries. And we can see here in this room and all in LSE that it's a very diverse place, and we have people from all kinds of all places in the world. And then my question is, as we establish now cooperation between each other and as academics and future leaders of their countries, how can we make sure that the governments in these countries and sometimes immature societies would follow the advice of the academics? Thank you very much.
Thank you. There you are. You can earn your money now. But we're going to give you a little bit of space.
Okay.
Because we're going to go to this lady. Thank you for your patience. And then we're taking 3. And then we're going to go to Paul. And then we've got 2 more who caught my eye, Jim and a colleague here. So, where you go, madam? Name, question.
Thank you. Ruchi, I was here in mid-90s, and I'm a practitioner in development, international development. So my question is much more around how...
Thank you.
So what are the incentives at the university level to really model sort of cooperation and model some of these sort of behaviors that we want to see in the world out there, instead of the hyper-competition, both amongst academia and students. So, and really thinking, so what I really enjoyed being at LSE was the interdisciplinary nature. I was in Destin, which development studies department, which doesn't exist in the same way. So really, what are the incentives to collaborate and modeling behavior rather than hyper-specialization as well? Thank you.
Thank you. And there's going to be a short one, well, possibly a short one, before we go back to Larry. Reminding us all of who you are.
So, I'm Paul Kelly, as you know. I've been here since 1984. On and off. A very interesting talk, 5 big challenges for us to deliver on. Couldn't disagree with any of them. But what are the challenges this institution faces in order to deliver on those challenges? And not just money, but one or two challenges that we have to face if we're to do that.
Brilliant. Thanks, Paul. And I think we're going to begin to think about being briefish to pack
You mean
more questions
me?
in.
Sorry.
I'm trying to save you from the first question. I'm doing my bit here.
Okay.
Fantastic.
All right, getting academics listened to. If anybody has the answer to that, I'm happy to hear it. What I will say is, when I started out as a professor, the membranes between what went on in the academy and what went on in government and the outside world were pretty thin, and so actually work got read. It didn't always get followed, but it got read and respected. There's so much noise now. So one of the things we're thinking about in terms, as we think about what we're doing going forward, is to build resources within the university to help get the kind of work here that's being done out into the world. So it's a lot to ask faculty themselves to do that, find partners, develop the partnerships, spend the time, although obviously they're needed to play a role in that insofar as it's their ideas and it's their work, and I think most people would be happy to if they have the kind of support to do it. So I think we have a responsibility to do more than not just LSE, universities have done in the past to try and get our ideas out into the world, because it's so much harder to do that. On modeling cooperation, incentives to collaborate, reducing specialization, that's a tough one also. Some parts of it are easier. I think we've already begun, I hope this year, to think about a lot of things to model and create incentives and make it easier for and provide training for students to talk and argue across their disagreements. But that's a different problem from the fact that we have a student body who come in and for good reason have to start thinking about the job they're going to get after right away and getting their grades, there so that they can get, and those are forces we can do relatively little about, other than, and I'm open to ideas on that too. Same thing with specialization, which is a product of all of that. So I don't know that I have answers to that other than an openness and willingness to, you can talk to students like, really, you don't need to work quite that hard. But you still, can imagine, I'm going to say in front of the faculty, have a life. But I do believe this. I do. We've had meetings, because I think for undergraduates in particular, these 3 years, learning is only one of the things you do. It's also a growing up period and a try on new identities period and all of that. So I do think we want to foster that kind of environment, which may help some, but we're fighting really big outside forces, and they're legitimate forces given where the world is. Challenges for us to deliver, well, those were two of them. I think there are a lot. Resources is a part of it. You cannot understate the extent to which whatever we might want to do is going to require resources to do it. And if you think about some of the things that I talked about. So for instance, the reason I did these 5 challenges the way they are is the university is organized by disciplines, as it should be. That's how training works. It's how you get the deep knowledge that you need to work within a field. But the problems in the world are not organized by disciplines. So here the idea is these hubs are organized around problems that will have resources for faculty around the university to come together. It's one of the ways, without forcing anybody, but once you do, you start talking to people, you find people who are actually sharing what you're interested in, but in a different way, you can begin to collaborate. So that's one of the things, that is to generate the kind of scholarship that's needed and then get it out in the world. So that's what all these things are about. And then, of course, the culture challenge is huge. The issues which are legitimate issues where people feel so strongly about things so that they don't talk to each other. That's a huge challenge, not just for us, but for every university, and not just in universities, although especially for universities. So those kinds of problems, that's not a resource thing. That is a modeling. It's helping people see and talk and understand and appreciate the importance, actually. The way I do think about it and have tried to talk to people is, here we want you to, because when you go out there, you're going to face that, and if you're not really prepared, because you haven't really confronted the ideas fully and learned what you need to learn and seen what you might be able to do to help somebody who thinks you're wrong change their mind, then we're not preparing you adequately. But that requires creating an environment. So there's that slew of challenges which are not all resource-based.
Thank you. I'm going to take 2 from, I've lost one, which is fine, thanks, Jim. I'm going to ask one myself, if I may, after this one. Yeah, go ahead, please. And I know you are, but just say who you are.
Thank you, Conor. I'm Tony Grabiner. I was a student here 1,000 years ago. I then taught here, and I then became chairman of governors, and the LSE made me. And I thought your lecture tonight was absolutely terrific. Thank you very much indeed. You talked on a very broad canvas, and I want to ask you about a very specific point, and that is the developing phenomenon of cancellation, which is a big issue in British universities and I think elsewhere, including in America. Do you regard that as a challenge for the social sciences?
Thank you. And my question is actually connected. It's not come up, and I think I need to raise it, which is about the single biggest thing that's happened in your tenure so far, Larry, and which has happened across a whole range of universities in North America and the United Kingdom, which has been the phenomenon of encampments, and which have been efforts to get universities to address questions arising out of conflict, both generally and specifically in the Middle East. Now, those of you who are here will know that this was an extraordinary thing for Larry as a president to come into in his first term.
2 weeks.
First 2 weeks. And it's, behind it, got an attempt to wrench a new kind of common sense. I suppose I could use the language of your lecture to say there's an effort by students to achieve a paradigm shift, to get us to think differently about the way we invest. And it's also driven, I think, by their desire to be able to be seen to do something and so on. And LSE has made various commitments on investments as a result of discussions and so on. And I think on behalf, I have to say it myself, I don't run from my own responsibility here, but on behalf of many students and others, faculty and so on, who've experienced this extraordinary period, we would be interested in the cancellation point, a highly relevant point, but also on your view of where we stand in regards investments in various products which have been so controversial.
Sure. Okay, first on the cancellation point. So it's kind of a loaded way to frame it already, right? So the way I would think about it...
He is a barrister.
So first, the answer to this is going to be yes, it's a challenge for the social science, but it's also a challenge whether you're a social science, that's an academic aspect to understand and think about what you might do, but also just culturally within any institution, it's a challenge. So the way I think about it, again, it's one version or manifestation of this larger problem of whether people are willing to actually engage with people who they strongly disagree with and think are radically wrong. And, you know, I have not experienced at LSE a cancellation problem. But what I do think we have at LSE is true at every university is something that comes before that, which is a self-censorship problem. And we know that's happening, and we know that's happening across the political spectrum, and we know that it's happening in classrooms and diminishing classroom conversations and exchanges outside the classroom. And, you know, you got to be kidding yourself to think that that's not a problem. It has been a problem for a very long time. To say it's always somewhat true because people are often nervous that if they take a position, what kind of social sanction they might face otherwise. But it has definitely gotten much worse. Social media has been a massive contributor to that as well. So as I say, I think fostering an environment where people feel comfortable that they can take positions and say things that others may find really problematic is, again, there's anybody who tells you they have an easy solution to that is just lying. I mean, the position the school has taken on this, which I feel very comfortable with and think is right, is in terms of the school's regulation, punishment or not punishment, making decisions about who gets to speak or who doesn't. We're just using the legal line, right? If it's lawful, then we are not punishing speakers, we're not prohibiting them from speaking or any of that. If it's unlawful, we will. What that means, by the way, coming from the US, this is a much bigger problem in the US than it is in the UK because the law, the legal line within the UK is like, within the US allows so much more reprehensible speech than in the UK. But still, even within the UK legal framework, there is lots of room for speech that is offensive, that is Islamophobic, that is anti-Semitic, that is racist, that is misogynistic. It just is there. And the problem is if we start to go down the line of punishing or regulating it, you know, we're just going to make things worse. And there's so much experience of that. So this comes back to the culture problem. We have to do our best to try and create a culture in which we can get people not to do that, to think harder, to understand that they don't need to frame what they have to say in a way that is deliberately a poke in the eye or a punch in the stomach to somebody else. I mean, that's part of our obligation and responsibility to do it. And we have to do that with awareness of the way in which different people come to the school with a different sensibility about how they can speak and about what kind of voice they can have. All of that, I mean, those are all legitimate concerns. My only view is the one thing is the university can't try and manage those problems by controlling the speech. We have to find other ways to do it. But the problem's never going away, and the best we can do is manage it as best we can and do the best we can. That's how I feel on that. On the, encampments encampments are a different issue from divestment.
Yeah.
I mean, the encampment was really a question of what kind of protest is okay and what kind is not. And, we did not have an issue with the encampment as such until it forced a huge disruption by requiring the shutdown of a building. Okay, divestment. So it puts me in a difficult position because since it's not my decision, it's not management's decision, it's a council decision. So what I will say is this, a couple things. One is, for many of the people here, this is a new problem. For anybody on our council or within the school who's been around, it's not. The issue has been around for 40 or 50 years, including in the Middle East, right? And so there's nothing new here, which is why for a lot of people, I would talk to people and they'd be frustrated because I seem to have answers to their questions that were all too quick, and it'd be like, well, no, because I've been thinking about and engaging with these issues for 3 decades. And so this is, so it feels new. And it's just worth noting that. The university has, and they did this last July, the council thought through all these things again and basically made it one decision, right, which is the general rule that we articulated for internal purposes, which is that the university will not take political stances, applies as well to the endowment management, so that we will not change our investment practices, and this is the way council put it, if the purpose or primary effect is to make a political statement. Then they're open to reconsidering various forms of investment within that frame. So we have a process that's just starting up. Actually, you're involved in it, I think. That's just starting up, which will, over the course of this year, review our ESG policy and make decisions on a lot of the issues that have been raised around fossil fuels, around arms, and so on. So, my view is that's the right thing to do. What complicates it a little for some people is it's not a popular vote kind of thing. It's not a question of even what you guys want. Even if all of you want something, the council has a fiduciary responsibility that is limited both by the legal terms of what its charter permits and by the need to think about future students and faculty. And so obviously it includes taking into account where the community is, but it's an independent decision the council has a fiduciary responsibility to make. I think they're quite open to hearing from everybody who has a view on it. I think they have and will continue to take what they hear quite seriously. And again, the only thing to remember is it just doesn't follow, therefore, though, that they'll do what people want, right? Because, as I say, this is not a new issue, and people have been thinking about it for a long time. The question is whether there's something different about the context.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Larry. Danny, we're going to take, maybe we have time for one remote or 2 quick remotes. I'd like to end in the room, but and we're getting towards the end, so we'll take these 2, and then I'll find a final
They're
speech.
on a theme, so I think this will work.
Yeah.
This is, sadly, another anonymous user. Your talk has focused on the research side of things, and of course, this is a research-intensive university. But do you have any comments on your vision for education at LSE? And since I have the microphone, I'm going to take Conor's lead and ask my own non-planted question. I'll take your point that a university, by definition, can't take ideological positions. But isn't there a bit of Popper's toleration of intolerance there? This institution is only popular, or is only possible in a certain kind of society that tolerates certain things and does not tolerate others. Don't we have any duty to that kind of ideological paradigm in the way we handle ourselves and in the positions we take?
Yeah.
Right. I'm going to take the gentleman right behind you, and I'm going to go to you, and then we're going to have you as a final set of remarks, and then we'll finish on time. Can you do 4 in a row? Have you got those?
I can do it.
Yeah. So, sir, well, I'm going to say something at the end. This is quite a punishing schedule. Sir.
Right, I'm Ian Gordon. I'm an emeritus in geography. I should say this is my 2nd attempt in a week at this question, and to ask the last question of a president.
Second last.
So I was talking to the president of the Social Science Academy last week was lecturing, and I asked him about the position of social scientists as the enemy of the populists. So the way in which I think the populists see the world is a conflict between people who know things and experts who profess to know things and who increasingly dominate Parliament and so on, even if they're actually lawyers, they profess to be experts. And the LSE is really, really very symbolic of this issue, it seems to me, and I wondered what you thought we could do about it.
Right. Thank you very much, despite that diversion into abuse of lawyers. And the very last word from the audience, though the last word before I wrap up will be from Larry. Sir, you've got the microphone and your last succinct question, please.
It may not be a question. Okay, Inas Ulfate, I was here in the 70s. My dad was here in the 40s. I'm also one of the judges and mentors on LSE Generate. I just wanted to say that hearing Larry helped remind me of why I came to the LSE in the 70s with my idealism. And I think this place, over generations, it straddles different kinds of idealisms. I never thought that something like an LSE Generate or enterprise would be as radical as coming to the LSE in the 70s, or my dad in the late 40s, to do stuff for what we know as the majority world. And I think LSE is a really radical and innovative place for that. And I think the ideas I had in the 70s seem a bit out of date if I look to see what the students are doing, the ones who are starting out. So I just want to say what you said today really helped straddle all of that. And I think we've got people here who studied here and their kids are here now. So it's really exciting just to sit here and hear how, just through nature, people are still choosing to come here. So just me to say back to you, to validate you, but also the whole LSE community, and in fact the civil society we live in, to say, you know, this is a really good sign of stuff. And I'm so glad I came here. Thank you for invigorating all of us again.
Well, I mean, that was like a vote of thanks, which came spontaneously. Now, I'm not super keen on that round of applause because it dilutes the potential for the round of applause at the end. But I'm going to ask Larry to spend a couple of minutes. I'm sorry, we've given you such a hard time. A couple of minutes, and then we'll finish on time. So, Larry, over to you. Final remarks. No, yeah, I'm sorry. No. You've had a moving and tribute success.
In the LSE in the 1970s, and I met the occupation this time, and I still feel it's all very joined up. So
Right. Thank you very much for that. Thank you. Are you finished? Larry.
Okay, vision for teaching or education. I'm actually a little more nervous to wade in there, not because I don't have thoughts, but because that's probably the area in which my thoughts as Vice Chancellor should have the least weight, in the sense that, as I say, I said administrative decentralization is less important than intellectual decentralization, but administrative decentralization matters. And so we, I think quite rightly, look to all of our departments to think about what's the best way to provide the education that they should for their kids. That said, just, so you know where I'm coming. If I had my druthers, pardon me, I am American. I think 4 years is better than 3. I think 3 years is very quick and not enough time to really do stuff, particularly because I would love our students to have more opportunity to get a more liberal artsy kind of education, which would require more time so that they could take more. This is this incredible school. There's like 20, how many departments? 24? 25 departments, they're all interesting, and for the students to not get to, I mean, nobody could do all 25, but so I would love to see more of that, things like that. I would love to, the amount of bureaucratization I met with the Office for Students today, and they were actually great in a lot of ways, but nevertheless, the amount of bureaucratization that's been imposed on us, which constrains a lot of the creative stuff that we can do. So, I want to teach at the law school, and so far 4 classes that I proposed, David has said, well, that would be a great class, but we can't offer that for credit. Because it doesn't fit within the narrow kind of contract. So I would love to see some loose, you have these hugely creative faculty, and it's like, okay, 2 service courses, and then what do you want to do that would be interesting? That will be great for our students. So, my vision would be much more of those kinds of things, which I'd love to see us able to do. Danny, your point, so here's it's always a conundrum. It's the classic free speech conundrum, which is it includes protecting the speech of people who want to shut down free speech. And I think that you have to enable that. Now, I think we thread that needle in 2 ways, right? One is inside this institution, those views can be held and they can't be realized. outside, I think they shouldn't be realized, and the point is, the people who want to support free speech and the people who want to oppose it, they're going to get their best training about how to have their arguments out there where it will matter, where decisions can be made. But the university itself, it's because of it, that's why I started this talk that way, its unique role requires it actually to be a place of classic liberal protection of ideas and free speech. And it needs to do that with this, come back to the earlier point, with some awareness of the legitimate critique, which is not everybody, they're not all in the same position. They don't all have the same freedom of speech. So we have to think about and address that as well. My only point is we're not going to address that by shutting down one side. We have to figure out how to empower, make people feel comfortable, overcome what may have been the environments in which they were raised and feel more comfortable pushing their ideas and so on. And that's got to be part of the training that we provide. On populism, you know, I don't actually see it that way. So this is one of these much abused terms. Historically, all populism really means is the rejection of elites and elite institutions. And it has in all of its forms over history. That's always, so that's what we are seeing today. What counts as populism is simply the rejection of a set of elite institutions that a group of people feel has not heard them, have not addressed their concerns, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think that they're the enemies of social science. I think they are, we need to understand why they feel that way and address those concerns along with other ones. And I think to not see it that way is where we get ourselves into trouble. The biggest, and I'm going to just reflect on US politics. The problem in US politics, the reason the Democrats are doing so poorly and increasingly losing even their traditional supporters is that they don't do that. They don't make people feel like they're hearing what their problems are. And what our job as social scientists is simply to understand what the problems are and do our best to try and understand how to address them in ways that can work for people. So, as I say, populism is a reaction to something, but I don't see it as the enemy. And I think I don't want to see people who hold those beliefs as the enemy, or we're not going to make any progress. Which, to a closing, then I would just say this. I do really what you said. I appreciate it a lot. At the same time, I do know and understand, though they didn't all speak here and many of them probably aren't here, there are people who are very angry. And they're very angry at me or us, SMC, as representatives of something that they don't like. And as I say, I understand that. Our job is to try as best we can to also listen to that and hear them and answer as best as we can. And, you know, it comes with it. This is not a popularity contest, sadly, or maybe it shouldn't be sadly. Maybe I'm glad it's not a popularity contest. But it is a matter of, and this is, I do believe, what I and what everybody else on SMC and all of the faculty that I've encountered view as what we're trying to do. So it's really to listen and hear and understand and create that kind of environment.
Thanks, Larry. Thanks, Larry. I think we're going to wrap up. I want to thank the people with the microphones, the stewards. Thank you very much for getting everybody in so much on time. I want to thank the security and comms teams, the guys working the cameras. It's been a collective LSE effort. Thank you all for coming and filling this unforgiving room. Thank you. Thank you. Now look, we're gonna nip out. Larry's gonna nip out, and he's looking as though he needs a drink. I don't blame him.
No, you are. There's drinks. Remember.
I don't think you have any understanding of quite how grueling that is to sit there and answer so many questions. A prodigious effort. He didn't have to do it. He could have hidden behind bureaucracy. So, as we move out, can you give a rousing, proper round of applause for Larry Kramer?